Now, in our Sunday special report, Taiwan used to have nearly 900 separate self-contained villages for military service people and their families, but most have now been torn down as part of resettlement projects for their former residents.
Facing the disappearance of these communities' unique culture, a group of companies and cultural historians demanded government action. In 2012, the Defense and Culture Ministries designated 13 military dependence communities across Taiwan as cultural preservation zones.
And in the past few years, local authorities have joined in the fight to preserve the community's historical legacy. But they're still facing a host of challenges.
Today, Kuo Chu-yuen, a former resident of Chung Chen New Village in Hsinchu, returned to her old home, which had been totally hollowed out.
This is a small living room, and in here is the bedroom. We use that area as a kitchen.
Kuo and practically all of her old neighbors either served in the Air Force or were family members of those who did. Chang Ling-yun, a former chief of the village, could still remember many of the details of life in the community's early days.
Back then, there was no gas to light incense, so we used coal intended for steelmaking.
In the years around 1949, roughly 600,000 uniformed servicemen and their dependents arrived in Taiwan from China. The ruling KMT government built or designated housing for many of them, dividing them up by military affiliation, profession, and other factors. 100,000 were sent to live in newly built dependence communities, with the remainder charged with preparing their own accommodations.
其他有40-50万的军人，他就必须要想办法自己找地方住。
400,000 or 500,000 military servicemen and their dependents had to find their own places to live. And so these so-called unofficial or independent veterans villages were formed according to their different backgrounds and origins.
On this side was an old fort, which was really dark inside, especially on the first floor.
The fort in Kuo Chu-yuen's memory was actually the Hsinchu branch of the Imperial Japanese Army's 6th fuel factory, whose towering smokestack served as one of Chung Chen New Village's famous landmarks.
Why is
there this chute for coal? Well, because this was originally a coal-fired power plant, so the floor above is where the coal was dumped into the furnace to be burned.
Continuing on into the main building reveals a whole other complex of rooms.
Later on, the village residents put up small lofts here. Look here at this roof with 2 stories. After water started coming through, they put up another metal sheet as a roof. The large factory actually provided living space for residents.
Military families who weren't given space in new housing projects moved one by one into the factory, where they built their own makeshift rooms. Subsequent expansion lent the area its unique appearance of rooms built one on top of the other. Historical preservation of the unique architecture found in dependence villages, extending to features like Chung Chen New Village's smokestack, is an issue that's gained more and more attention in recent years. Amid attempts to redevelop villages like Taipei's 44 South Village and the independent village on Treasure Hill, more and more developers and cultural historians joined petitions to ensure the government preserve these historic communities. Those efforts culminated in a 2007 amendment to the Act for Rebuilding Old Quarters for Military Dependents, which secured a legal basis for preservation.
Amendments to the Act were proposed in the hope of adding a section on cultural preservation, and they set up a 400 million NT dollar fund that let the country's municipalities carry out cultural preservation of these dependence villages in cooperation with the Defense and Culture Ministries.
In 2012, the Defense and Culture Ministries announced that they had designated 13 such villages across Taiwan for preservation, and would work to put them into public use as venues for cultural events. But despite the growing official support for cultural preservation, municipal authorities working to implement the law hit a snag. The Defense Ministry reserved the right to sell the land from dependence villages that had been torn down, and put that money into the Preservation Fund. But local governments charged with preserving designated villages were forced to purchase development rights for that land from the Defense Ministry itself.
为了要弥补眷改基金的亏损，
To make up for losses in the Preservation Fund, the Defense Ministry asked municipal governments to change their urban development plans and pay it for the development rights to the villages. Making up for that kind of losses takes a long time.
Effectively preserving both the material and intangible cultural legacy of these dependence villages requires cooperation and meticulous planning between the Defense Ministry, the Culture Ministry, and municipal authorities. From current evidence, the important work of securing that legacy still has a long way to go.